Chaps, welcome back to SG MMA. Now today I'm talking about number one contenders, which is quite a topical thing at the moment. Obviously we've got UFC 310's co-main of Shavkat and Ian Gary. That's the number one contenders fight. All the Tom Aspinall, John Jones stuff. I thought I would compare and somewhat matchmake the number one contenders of today versus the corresponding ones from 5 years ago in 2019. Let's get into it. With that being said, let's start at the top with heavyweight. And of course, as I've just said, the number one contender is Mr. Tom Aspinall. And way back in 2019, the end of 2019, so it's exactly 5 years, it was Daniel Cormier. Right, chaps, I just want to say, as a bit of a sort of a disclaimer, I am comparing the current versions of the number one contenders in every division with the 2019 versions of the opposite fighters. Right, so this is not Prime DC. This is the Daniel Cormier that beat Stipe Miocic in the first fight and then lost in the rematch. In between that and their trilogy fight at UFC 252. That's the DC we're talking about here. There are a few occasions where the hindsight of an extra 5 years being removed is incredibly beneficial for a video like this, and DC later revealed after his career was over that even earlier than 2019 he was having massive issues with his back and that was affecting his ability to grapple, which is why for most of the Stipe trilogy, it was a striking match, all 3 times. And that information kind of makes this matchup very straightforward. He would have been knocked out relatively early by Tom Aspinall. And I don't think anybody can really have a problem with me saying that. Now, if we were talking about Prime DC a few years earlier, it could have been a different story. But even then, I think Aspinall's a jiu-jitsu game, especially off his back. If you've seen him train, he hasn't had to use much of it in the UFC. But if you look at him train, you look at who he trains with and the quality of his BJJ, he would have been able to at least offer some defence against Daniel Cormier and probably get back to his feet and chin him. So I think Aspinall would have blown him out of the water. The current Aspinall knocks out the 2019 Daniel Cormier quite easily. Let's move down to light heavyweight, and it's a matchup that we have actually seen in real life. It's the current number one contender Magomed Ankalaev against the 2019 number one contender Thiago Santos. Now again, we do have to add the 2019 context. At this very moment in time, Mr. Santos had a very good performance against the legendary John Jones. He won the fight on one of the scorecards and he blew out his knee in the first round. It was a wonderful night for Thiago Santos, even though he didn't get the nod overall. But you do have to remember that this was the period of Jones's career right at the end of his stint at 205, where he had a couple of lackluster nights. And Santos' knee injury would be a massive issue going forward in his career, and it would effectively ruin most of his UFC career. Plus, he was getting old. As soon as he went to the PFL, he popped for steroids. You know, it very much felt like the pinnacle had happened on that one night. Even though he lost, it was definitely the highlight of his career. With that being said, I believe it would have been another easy win for the current crop. I don't think the time offset would have particularly changed an awful lot. I don't think the Thiago Santos in 2019 was much better, if better at all, really, looking at it logistically, than the one that Ankalaev eventually fought. And I don't think Ankalaev has got any worse in that time. If anything, he's got better. So the gap may have even been bigger if these two versions of themselves were to square off. So Ankalaev would have dealt with Thiago Santos quite easily. Looking at middleweight, it's very interesting because the fight that I am about to bring to you using the parameters that I have set for the video could be made even now. The 2019 number one contender was Robert Whittaker, who was fresh off of losing his title against Adesanya at UFC 243, I believe it was. And Sean Strickland, the most recent champion before the current one, Mr. DDP. Like I've already mentioned a couple of times, it's important to add the time context. I believe that the best period of Robert Whittaker's MMA career in terms of the performances was the time in between the first and second Adesanya fights. And I think the best of Sean Strickland, we're seeing it right now. So you could argue the best versions of both of these guys would be squaring off in this situation. And I think Strickland would win. I'll explain to you why. This might sound a bit oversimplified, people, but if you are somebody who is predominantly back foot, which Israel Adesanya is, and especially at this period of time, Robert Whittaker was. He has aggression to him, but he's more of a sort of run around the outside of the octagon and counter. I don't mean that to sound like derogatory or anything, but that is a lot of what he tries to do. And if you look at the guys who have had major success against Sean Strickland recently, I'm looking at the likes of Jared Cannonier and most recently, of course, the brand new champion, Mr. DDP. they move into him, they try and push him back, and they try and take the centre of the octagon. Whittaker moves around and would allow Strickland the space to walk him down, which is bad news. I don't believe the offensive grappling of a 2019 version of Robert Whittaker is at the level of the current Dricus du Plessis level of offensive grappling, so I don't think he would have given Sean too many problems in that regard. And I just think that Strickland would have walked him down. He's bigger. He's, like I said, he's superb moving forward and he struggles moving backwards. And Whittaker, especially at that period of time, he wasn't walking people down, he was letting people walk into his shots, basically. And I think Strickland is good enough defensively, we saw it in the Adesanya fight, to keep himself safe and march a 2019 version of Whittaker down. So, yeah, that's just my take. Let's move on to 170, which is another very interesting one to think about, and a fight that we very nearly saw. The current number one at 170 is former champion Leon Edwards. And the corresponding 2019 number one was Tyron Woodley, who that year had just lost his welterweight title against Usman. This, I believe, was supposed to headline a UK card. I don't actually remember if it was just an injury or if it was COVID that called this off. It was one of the two. It may have been both. But yeah, we very nearly got this fight when Leon Edwards was getting much closer to earning the title shot that he eventually got and won. And Tyron Woodley was trying to bounce back after losing his world title fight. Now, again, you've got to add the context here. We saw what happened with Tyron Woodley after he lost that belt. We don't know how Leon Edwards is going to respond to the same thing happening. We haven't seen that yet, but we have seen what happened with Tyron Woodley. Woodley massively faltered at the end of his run with the UFC, and after leaving, he went and got knocked out by Jake Paul, as we've all seen many, many times by now. So, we don't know that with Leon Edwards. Like I've said, there is an unknown, but just going off of what we do know, it would have been a very good fight, because the one thing that Leon Edwards really doesn't like is a scrap. And if you watch the early career of Tyron Woodley, he was knocking people out. He didn't even need to use his wrestling. The shot he landed on Robbie Lawler was the punch I would show my friends in the lead up as the Jake Paul fight and say, don't you dare think that this fucking geezer was going to beat Tyron Woodley. He did, but it showed the ferocity of the man. And I think a little bit of that was gone by 2019, but not all of it. Not all of it by any means. Leon proved, especially in his third fight against Usman at UFC 286, that his defensive and even his offensive grappling work is really, really good. But you have to kind of factor in the fact that Usman's style of grappling is very different to Tyron Woodley's. Usman, especially at that point, he was a little bit like an anaconda in a way. He would literally just lay on you, wear you down, and just kind of lull you into a submission kind of thing. Woodley was a bit more dynamic than that. I mean, you saw the Darren Till fight at UFC 228. That's the kind of thing that Tyron Woodley can do if he gets a hold of you. He was battering up Wonderboy Thompson in their second fight from top position. Leon Edwards really enjoys a technical kind of fight. And Usman's a technical fighter. With Tyron Woodley, there's a little bit more impulse. There's a little bit more kind of dynamism and explosivity that would have gave Leon problems. Would that version of Woodley have been enough to beat the current version of Leon Edwards? Just about probably not. No, I don't think so. Simply because, like I said, I think a lot of the spark inside of Tyron Woodley was gone by that point. We don't know if that same spark has gone from Leon Edwards yet. Like I've said, there's an unknown there. But just based on what we've seen and what we know, I think Leon Edwards would probably weather an early storm against Tyron Woodley, but he would eventually kind of figure it out and win over 5 rounds, I believe. Very close, though. That one could have gone either way. Next up, lads, we go to lightweight. And this fight, like, obviously with the 2024 context, sounds absolutely blasphemous. But if you add the 2019 context, it makes sense in the video. Arman Tsarukyan against Tony Ferguson. I laugh. However, the 2019 version of Tony was an animal, as we know. That was about a year, well, actually about 6 months, really, before he lost against Justin Gaethje at 249 and this horrible skid started. But I think Arman Tsarukyan would have quite soundly won this one. And I'll tell you for why. Because there was a period of time where I thought Prime Tony would have beaten Mr. Habib. Of course, we never saw it and we will never know. But the reason why I give Arman such a clear and obvious edge is after watching his fight against Dublancs. Charles Oliveira and Tony Ferguson have a couple of similarities. In a lot of ways, they're very, very different. But one thing they both do is they both thrive in chaos. Arman Tsarukyan was excellent in his fight with Oliveira at making sure that Oliveira had no way to kind of exert that chaos onto him. Because I think in a technical MMA fight, there's no way that a 2019 Tony beats a current Arman Tsarukyan. But in like weird crazy scrambles, or if he can get those weird flying spinning elbows off that he used to love to do, he had a chance against anybody. But watching how, not easily because it wasn't easily, but watching how Arman was able to deal with a similar kind of erratic, in a way, Charles Oliveira, means that I think he would have quite handedly beat a 2019 Tony. But that, like I said, that version of Tony would do things that he'd make so many natural, basic, like fundamental mistakes, and he'd still find a way to hurt people and finish them and just beat them up. Arman Tsarukyan seems very capable of sort of understanding where the risks are and completely negating them. So I would go with Arman. It's not looking good at the moment for the older guys. It's not going to get much better at featherweight either, to be honest. That is because the 2019 featherweight #1 contender was Max Holloway and the current one is Volkanovski, and they've already fought 3 times. Whoa, hold up there, SJ, mate. Remember the context. Now, obviously they've both been chinned very recently by Ilia Topuria, and the knockout of Holloway was arguably more surprising simply because nobody's ever hurt Max Holloway before. But Volkanovski's lost, I think it's 3 of his last 4 now, but he's only lost against Islam and Ilia Topuria. There's no shame in either of those losses. However, the 2019 version of Volkanovski was not prime Volkanovski. The prime Volkanovski era was about 2 years after that, running until the second fight against Islam, in my opinion. The Volkanovski of now, with the run he's been on since losing the 3rd fight against Volk, to losing against Ilia, I mean, I'm talking the Gaethje fight, obviously, the Arnold Allen fight, the Korean Zombie fight, which at the time, it felt like a massacre. It didn't feel bloody morally correct at all. But as more time passes, that's the perfect way for a guy like Zombie to go out. But I digress, people. We're going to get back on topic. So, how can I put this without sounding like a complete idiot? The 2019 version of Max Holloway is a better version of Max Holloway than the current version of Alexander Volkanovski. If that makes any sense. Simply because I think Volkanovski's hit that point in his career where it's probably only going to get worse. He's probably going to get chinned by Ilia again. He might move up to lightweight. He might fight a Diego Lopez or, I don't know, an Arnold Allen. If he can beat someone like a Lerone Murphy or something like that. Do you know what I mean? He probably won't be a champion again. The 2019 version of Max Holloway went on to be the BMF champion. To have that great fight against Justin Gaethje. To put on more special performances. But the 2019 Max Holloway is not as good as the current Max Holloway, even though he's just had a knockout loss. If that makes any sense at all. What I'm trying to say is, it would have been bloody close. And I honestly can't pick it. I know, I'm going to chicken out. 2019 Max Holloway versus present day Volkanovski. I can't pick it, people. Let me know in the comments. I think out of all the fights that I've made in this video, this is the one that I would like to watch the most. If we can get a time machine, rent it from, like, I don't know, CEX or something. 2019 Marlon Moraes against current Sean O'Malley. Come on now. Now, if you're a new fan of the sport, you may not know the name of Mr. Marlon Moraes. Basically, he was a little Brazilian fella who moved quicker than pretty much anybody I've ever seen in the sport. Who had a dodgy chin, but could just knock anybody out. Seriously. I'm thinking about this fight as I'm talking right now. It would have been absolute carnage. It could have been over in 30 seconds. It could have gone for 5 rounds of mayhem. We'll never know. We'll never see it, of course. But, yeah. Sorry, it's making me laugh. I'm going to pick Marlon Moraes. I am. I'm going to pick Marlon Moraes because Sean O'Malley is used to being the dynamic guy. And if you've got a little, I think he was like 5'3", prime version of Marlon Moraes, running underneath your jabs and shifting his head at 400 miles an hour, and trying to get in close and close that distance, and try and knock your head off with a massive uppercut or something, I think O'Malley would struggle with that. I think if Merab is able to close the distance on you and get through your attacks, Marlon Moraes, especially this version of Marlon, would have been able to. And if Marlon Moraes gets close to any bantamweight in history, and he lands at the right time, with the right shot, you're going to sleep, pretty much. And I think he would sleep O'Malley. which is the craziest thing I have ever said on this channel, and a lot of you guys are going to be calling me bloody clueless, and you might have a point, but yeah, I'm going to go with Marlon Moraes. I am literally going to be in bed later thinking about this fight, even though it's not going to happen, and I'm probably going to end up going bloody delirious over it. Either way, 2019 Marlon Moraes knocks out current Sean O'Malley. Have some of that. And we're going to finish with the little blokes, the flyweights. The number one contender at the moment is Brandon Royval, who I believe would have a sniff in a rematch with the champion Pantoja against the best flyweight to never win an undisputed UFC title, Joseph Benavidez. Now, by 2019, Joe B was basically finished. And he was completely finished off by Deiveson Figueiredo, as we all saw. Would that version of Joe be able to deal with the pressure, the reach, and the boxing abilities of a current prime version of Brandon Royval? No. No, he wouldn't. He'd got chinned quite quickly as well, I believe, to be honest. Which sounds really morbid, because I quite enjoyed the career of Benavidez. I mean, obviously, he's going out with that Megan Olivi, so fair play to him for that one. But, yeah, by 2019, he was done. His time to win the flyweight title had passed him by then. It's one of those situations where he was unfortunate to live through the dominance of a Demetrius Johnson. If he had come into the sport a little bit earlier, well, there was no flyweight division, I suppose. Yeah, he was basically fucked because of DJ, like a lot of them were, to be fair. But yeah, he wouldn't have been able to hold a torch against a 2024 Royval, using, of course, his 2019 version. A prime Joe B, maybe, but that's not the point of the video. It's a straight comparison from 5 years ago to right now. So yeah, another easy win for the current crop. You know, I'm not really sure what this video proves. I mean, it kind of does show that the standards has got better over the last 5 years, and I believe it has overall. But if you look at the number ones back then, a lot of them were older guys who had either held the title and lost it, or were either way on a decline. A lot of the guys now are very much at their pomp still. Most of them anyway. So I think that's a big factor here, but it was just a crazy video idea from yours truly. I thought I'd just give it a crack. See what happens. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see some other variations of maybe similar videos, I could go 10 years back or 20 years back. Let me know what you want to see. And yeah, I'll catch you very soon. Cheers.